Welcome, everyone. Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop chasing people's attention, they begin paying more attention to you? The moment you stop being available every second of the day, your peace grows, your confidence changes, and even the way people treat you starts to shift. This isn't about playing games or manipulating anyone. It's about understanding how the human mind responds to attention, boundaries, and value. Today, we're going to explore the neuroscience and psychology behind why becoming less available can completely transform your relationships, your focus, and your life. Let's begin. Imagine for a moment that someone could reach you at any time of the day. Every message receives an immediate response. Every phone call is answered. Every request gets a quick yes. At first, this might seem like kindness, responsibility, or reliability. But if we look at this through the lens of how the human brain actually works, something very different begins to emerge. The nervous system is fundamentally designed to adapt. This process is known as adaptation, and it is one of the most efficient mechanisms the brain has. Whatever becomes predictable gradually requires less attention. This is true for sounds, environments, rewards, and even people. When a stimulus is constantly available, the brain stops assigning it the same level of importance because it no longer represents uncertainty or novelty. Think about your own experience. The notification sound on your phone probably grabbed your attention the first few times you heard it. Weeks later, you barely notice it. The sound didn't change. Your brain changed. It learned that the stimulus was familiar and therefore no longer deserved the same level of focus. The exact same principle often appears in human relationships. When people know they can always access your attention instantly, their brains unconsciously begin treating your availability as the expected baseline. Your immediate response is no longer interpreted as something valuable. It simply becomes normal. The reward system, particularly circuits involving dopamine, is highly sensitive to prediction. When something is guaranteed, the anticipation decreases. When anticipation decreases, perceived value often decreases as well. This doesn't mean people intentionally disrespect you. Most of the time, they are simply responding according to the natural operating principles of the human nervous system. Predictability changes attention. Scarcity changes attention even more. Now, it's important to clarify something because this idea is often misunderstood. Becoming less available does not mean becoming cold, arrogant, or emotionally distant. Those behaviors create entirely different problems. What we're talking about is intentional availability rather than automatic availability. There's an enormous difference. Imagine two individuals. The first person answers every message within 30 seconds, regardless of what they're doing. They interrupt work, family dinners, exercise, or sleep because they believe responding immediately proves they care. The second person is equally caring, but they finish what they're doing before responding. They protect periods of uninterrupted work. They exercise without checking their phone. They spend time with family without constant digital interruptions. When they reply, they are fully present instead of mentally scattered.
Which person actually offers higher quality attention?
Most people assume the first one. In reality, it's usually the second, because attention is not measured by speed, it's measured by presence. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, decision-making, emotional regulation, and goal-directed behavior, functions best when it is allowed sustained periods of uninterrupted focus. Every unnecessary interruption forces the brain to perform what's known as task switching. Contrary to popular belief, humans don't truly multitask very well. Instead, the brain rapidly shifts attention between tasks, and every shift carries a cognitive cost. Now imagine spending an entire day responding instantly to every text, email, notification, and request. Your brain never enters deep focus. It remains in a state of continuous vigilance, waiting for the next interruption. Over time, this changes not only your productivity, but also how you experience yourself. You begin feeling reactive rather than intentional. Instead of deciding where your attention goes, the outside world decides for you. That's an incredibly important distinction. Attention is one of the brain's most limited biological resources. Every moment you direct attention toward one thing, you're choosing not to direct it somewhere else. This is why high performers across nearly every field deliberately create periods where they cannot be reached. Not because they dislike people, but because they understand that meaningful work requires uninterrupted cognitive engagement. There's another fascinating aspect to this. People often believe that saying yes to everything strengthens relationships. In reality, excessive availability can unintentionally weaken them because interactions become automatic rather than meaningful. Consider two conversations. In one, someone replies instantly while simultaneously checking emails, scrolling social media, and thinking about work. In the other, someone responds later but gives complete attention, listens carefully, asks thoughtful questions, and remains fully engaged. The second interaction usually creates a much stronger emotional connection because humans are remarkably good at detecting genuine presence. Presence is remembered far longer than speed. Your nervous system also communicates information without words. Every action teaches people what to expect from you. If you consistently abandon your own priorities whenever someone contacts you, you unintentionally train others to believe your time is always available. Not because they're selfish, but because expectations are formed through repeated experience. Behavior creates expectation. Expectation shapes relationships. That's why changing your availability often changes how people respond to you. When your attention becomes intentional instead of automatic, others begin recognizing that your time carries value. More importantly, you begin recognizing it yourself. And that's where the biggest transformation occurs. Because the moment you stop treating your own attention as something that should be given away without thought, your brain starts organizing itself differently. You become less reactive, more deliberate, and more capable of directing your energy toward the people and goals that genuinely matter. Ironically, becoming selectively available doesn't reduce your impact on others. It often increases it, not because you're trying to create mystery or manipulate anyone, but because you're finally operating in alignment with the way the human brain naturally assigns attention, value, and meaning. One of the greatest misunderstandings about boundaries is that people often interpret them as emotional walls. They assume that if you begin saying no more often, respond less frequently, or protect your personal time, you're becoming selfish or disconnected. But from the perspective of how the brain regulates energy and behavior, boundaries are not barriers to healthy relationships. They are mechanisms that allow healthy relationships to exist in the first place. Every day, your brain is making thousands of decisions about where to allocate attention. This process is metabolically expensive. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, judgment, impulse control, and emotional regulation, consumes a significant amount of energy whenever it is actively engaged. Unlike a machine that can operate indefinitely with the same efficiency, the human brain experiences cognitive fatigue. The more demands placed upon it without sufficient recovery, the less effectively it performs. This is why mental exhaustion often appears long before physical exhaustion. Many people wake up with a clear intention for the day. They have meaningful work to accomplish, personal goals they want to pursue, and relationships they genuinely care about. But before they've made meaningful progress, they have already responded to dozens of messages, solved problems that belong to other people, attended unnecessary conversations, and allowed countless interruptions to fragment their attention. By the end of the day, they feel drained, yet they struggle to identify exactly why. The answer is often not that they work too hard. It's that they allowed too many external demands to compete for the same limited pool of cognitive resources. The nervous system functions best when it can predict periods of focused engagement followed by periods of recovery. Constant interruptions disrupt this rhythm. Every unexpected demand forces the brain to reorient itself, activating networks involved in attention shifting. Even brief interruptions leave residual mental activity behind, meaning part of your brain continues thinking about the previous task while attempting to focus on the next one. Over time, this creates a state where your attention is divided almost continuously. And divided attention almost always produces divided performance. Now consider what happens when someone establishes healthy boundaries. Instead of answering every request immediately, they finish the task they're currently engaged in. Instead of agreeing to every invitation, they evaluate whether it aligns with their priorities. Instead of feeling responsible for solving everyone's problems, they recognize that other adults are capable of managing many challenges independently. Notice that none of these behaviors involve rejecting people. They involve protecting attention. There's an important distinction between being available and being present. Availability simply means people can reach you. Presence means your mind is actually with them. Modern technology has made availability almost unlimited, but presence has become increasingly rare. It's entirely possible to answer someone's message within seconds while giving them almost none of your genuine attention. Likewise, it's possible to respond hours later and provide thoughtful, focused communication that creates a much stronger connection. The brain is remarkably sensitive to authenticity. Humans unconsciously detect when someone is distracted, emotionally depleted, or mentally elsewhere. Even if no words are spoken, subtle changes in facial expression, tone of voice, and response quality communicate whether someone is fully engaged. This is one reason why protecting your mental energy actually improves relationships. When your nervous system is less overloaded, your capacity for empathy increases. You listen more carefully. You regulate emotions more effectively during disagreements. You become less reactive under stress. Instead of responding impulsively, you're able to pause, evaluate the situation, and choose an intentional response. That pause is incredibly valuable. Many interpersonal conflicts don't arise because people have bad intentions. They arise because mentally exhausted brains rely more heavily on automatic emotional reactions than deliberate reasoning. Emotional regulation depends heavily on sufficient cognitive resources. When those resources are depleted, patience decreases, frustration rises more quickly, and small problems begin feeling much larger than they actually are. Healthy boundaries protect against this process. There's another interesting aspect of boundaries that deserves attention. Every time you say yes to something, you're simultaneously saying no to something else. This isn't merely a philosophical statement. It's a biological reality. If you spend an hour handling unnecessary obligations, that's an hour unavailable for exercise, reading, creative thinking, meaningful conversations, recovery, or sleep. Since time and cognitive energy are finite, every commitment carries an opportunity cost. People often underestimate these hidden costs because they're focused only on the immediate request in front of them. But the brain keeps the score. When your schedule becomes overloaded, stress hormones remain elevated for longer periods. Recovery becomes less effective. Sleep quality may decline. Concentration becomes more difficult. Motivation begins fluctuating because the nervous system is attempting to conserve energy. Many people interpret this as laziness or lack of discipline. In reality, it's often accumulated cognitive overload. Boundaries interrupt that cycle. They allow your nervous system to operate within sustainable limits instead of constantly exceeding them. Interestingly, people who consistently maintain healthy boundaries are often perceived as calmer, more confident, and more dependable. That's not because they possess extraordinary personalities. It's because they have learned to protect the biological systems responsible for clear thinking and emotional stability. Confidence frequently emerges from consistency. And consistency becomes possible when your energy isn't constantly consumed by obligations that never belonged to you in the first place. When you stop treating every request as an emergency, something remarkable begins to happen. Your attention becomes more deliberate. Your decisions become more thoughtful. Your conversations become more meaningful because you're no longer spreading yourself across dozens of competing demands. You begin acting from intention rather than obligation. And over time, people notice the difference, not because you've become less caring, but because every interaction now carries a level of focus, clarity, and genuine presence that cannot exist when your mental energy is being pulled in every possible direction. There is a simple idea that has become increasingly important as we understand more about how the brain functions. Your attention is not just something you use, it is something you spend. Every moment of focused awareness carries a biological cost. Once that attention has been directed somewhere, it cannot be fully recovered. Time may continue moving forward, but the mental energy invested in a distraction, an unnecessary conversation, or constant digital interruptions is energy that can no longer be invested in something meaningful. Most people think of attention as unlimited because shifting it feels effortless. You glance at your phone, reply to a message, check an email, return to work, scroll through social media for a minute, and continue your task. It feels like you're simply moving between activities. But inside the brain, something much more complex is happening. The neural networks responsible for focused thinking do not instantly switch from one task to another. Instead, they carry traces of the previous activity into the next one. Cognitive scientists often describe this as an attention residue. A portion of your mental resources remains attached to what you were just doing, making it harder to become fully immersed in the present task. This is why you can spend 8 hours working and still feel like you accomplished very little. It isn't always because you lacked intelligence or motivation. It's because your attention never stayed in one place long enough for your brain to operate at its highest level. The prefrontal cortex thrives on sustained engagement. This region of the brain coordinates planning, decision-making, impulse control, creativity, and complex problem-solving. But it performs best when interruptions are minimized. Every unexpected notification, every unnecessary request, and every impulse to check your phone forces this system to reset. Think of it like trying to read an important book while someone interrupts you every 3 minutes. You can continue reading, but each interruption requires your brain to reconstruct the context of what you were thinking. That reconstruction consumes energy. Now multiply that by dozens or even hundreds of interruptions throughout a typical day. What begins as small moments of distraction gradually becomes chronic mental fragmentation. One of the most remarkable aspects of the nervous system is that it adapts to whatever patterns are repeated consistently. If your attention is constantly scattered, your brain becomes increasingly efficient at being distracted. On the other hand, if you regularly practice sustained focus, the neural circuits supporting concentration become stronger over time. In other words, attention is trainable. The quality of your focus tomorrow depends largely on how you use it today. This has enormous implications for every area of life. Whether you're building a career, improving your health, strengthening relationships, or learning a new skill, progress depends on periods of uninterrupted attention. Deep learning requires repeated activation of specific neural pathways. Those pathways become more efficient through consistent practice, but only if they receive enough continuous engagement. Constant availability disrupts that process. When people expect immediate responses from you at all times, your brain never settles into the state necessary for deep thinking. Instead, it remains in a mode of continuous monitoring, anticipating the next interruption before it even happens. Interestingly, this anticipation itself consumes mental energy. Even when your phone remains silent, simply expecting notifications changes how your attention operates. Part of your brain stays alert for potential interruptions, reducing the cognitive resources available for the task in front of you. This explains why many people feel mentally exhausted despite spending much of the day sitting at a desk. Mental fatigue often has less to do with physical effort and more to do with continuous attentional switching. Now consider what changes when you stop making yourself constantly available. The first thing you notice is discomfort. Many people experience an urge to check messages every few minutes, even when there is no real reason to do so. This urge isn't necessarily about communication. It's often about habit. Habits are encoded through repeated neural activity. Every time you respond immediately to a notification, your brain reinforces the expectation that interruptions deserve immediate attention. Over weeks, months, and years, this pattern becomes increasingly automatic. Breaking that cycle requires conscious effort. At first, protecting your attention feels unnatural because your nervous system has adapted to constant stimulation. But something interesting happens after a period of consistent practice. The mind becomes quieter. Instead of feeling pulled in multiple directions, your thoughts begin organizing themselves more clearly. Complex ideas become easier to understand because your brain has enough uninterrupted time to process them. Decision-making improves because you're evaluating information deliberately rather than reacting impulsively. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of repeatedly teaching your nervous system that not every external demand deserves immediate access to your attention. There's another important principle here. When you value your own attention, other people begin valuing it as well. Human beings unconsciously learn what matters by observing behavior. If you consistently interrupt important work to answer every message within seconds, you're communicating that your attention is always available on demand. Over time, people naturally come to expect that pattern. But when your actions demonstrate that focused work, personal growth, family time, exercise, or recovery deserve uninterrupted space, expectations gradually change. People begin recognizing that your attention has structure, and structure creates value. This isn't about creating distance from others. It's about creating enough mental space for your best thinking to emerge. Because your greatest ideas, your most meaningful conversations, and your highest quality work rarely appear in moments of constant distraction. They emerge when the brain has the opportunity to remain fully engaged with one thing long enough to uncover insights that scattered attention can never reach. The most successful people are not necessarily those who have the most hours in a day. They are often the ones who have learned to protect the quality of the attention they invest during those hours. And once you begin treating your attention as one of your most valuable biological resources instead of something that should be freely consumed by every interruption, you discover that your capacity for clarity, creativity, productivity, and genuine connection begins to expand in ways that many people never experience simply because they never stopped long enough to allow their brain to operate as it was designed to. One of the most interesting aspects of human behavior is that respect is rarely created through words alone. The brain pays far more attention to patterns than promises. People listen to what you say, but they learn who you are by watching what you repeatedly do. Every decision you make, how you spend your time, where you place your attention, and what you choose to tolerate becomes information that other people's nervous systems use to predict your future behavior. This process happens automatically. The brain is constantly building internal models of the people around us. These models allow us to anticipate how someone will respond, what they prioritize, and how much access we have to their attention. Once these predictions become stable, they begin shaping the dynamics of every interaction. If someone knows you will always change your plans to accommodate theirs, they eventually stop viewing that flexibility as something special. It becomes the expectation, not because they necessarily intend to take advantage of you, but because the brain naturally treats repeated experiences as the normal state of the world. This is one of the reasons why personal boundaries influence respect far more than repeated explanations ever could. Consider two individuals. The first consistently sacrifices sleep, work, exercise, and personal commitments whenever someone makes a request. They apologize for protecting their own time and frequently feel guilty for saying no. Their behavior communicates that everyone else's priorities deserve immediate attention. The second person is equally compassionate, but they make decisions based on long-term priorities rather than momentary pressure. They help when they genuinely can, but they also recognize that constantly abandoning their own responsibilities creates unnecessary stress and reduces their ability to contribute meaningfully in the future. Both individuals may care deeply about other people. The difference lies in the consistency of their actions. Human beings unconsciously associate consistency with reliability. When your behavior consistently reflects self-respect, others begin organizing their expectations around that standard. This isn't about appearing important, it's about creating predictability. The nervous system values predictability because it reduces uncertainty. When people know that your time has structure, your commitments become more meaningful, meetings begin on time, conversations become more intentional. Promises carry greater weight because they are not made impulsively. Ironically, protecting your time often increases trust rather than reducing it. There's another biological principle worth considering. Stress significantly influences decision-making. When people constantly overextend themselves, stress hormones remain elevated for longer periods. Under chronic stress, the brain shifts toward short-term survival strategies. Patience decreases. Emotional reactions become stronger. Impulse control becomes more difficult. In that state, it's much harder to communicate calmly or make thoughtful decisions.
This explains why individuals who never establish boundaries often experience growing resentment.
Initially, they say yes because they want to be helpful. Over time, however, each unnecessary obligation consumes additional energy. Eventually, the accumulated burden produces frustration, not necessarily toward the people making requests, but toward the constant feeling of having no control over one's own life. The interesting part is that this resentment often develops silently. Outwardly, nothing changes. Internally, motivation declines. Conversations become less genuine. Kindness begins feeling like obligation instead of choice. Healthy relationships cannot thrive under those conditions because authentic generosity requires freedom. When helping someone becomes something you choose instead of something you feel forced to do, your brain responds differently. Positive social interactions activate neural systems associated with connection, reward, and emotional well-being. But when every interaction feels compulsory, those same experiences may begin activating stress-related circuits instead. The external behavior might look identical. The internal biology is completely different. This is why protecting your own well-being is not separate from maintaining strong relationships. The two are deeply connected. There's also an important psychological effect that emerges when people observe someone who consistently honors their own commitments. It communicates confidence without requiring any verbal display. Confidence is often misunderstood as speaking loudly, dominating conversations, or projecting certainty. In reality, genuine confidence frequently appears much quieter. It is reflected in someone who doesn't abandon their values under social pressure. Someone who doesn't feel the need to justify every decision. Someone who understands that disappointing people occasionally is unavoidable if they are committed to living intentionally. That consistency becomes highly noticeable, not because it demands attention, but because it remains stable regardless of changing circumstances. Humans naturally trust stable patterns. The brain is constantly evaluating whether someone's behavior is predictable enough to rely upon. When your actions consistently align with your priorities, people begin believing what you communicate because your behavior reinforces your words. That alignment creates credibility. Another fascinating aspect of this process is that self-respect tends to influence social interactions through subtle nonverbal mechanisms. Your posture changes. Your pace of speaking changes. Eye contact becomes steadier. Your decisions become less rushed because you're no longer operating from the fear of disappointing everyone around you. These small behavioral shifts affect how other people perceive you, often without either person consciously recognizing why. The nervous system is exceptionally sensitive to confidence expressed through calmness. Calm behavior suggests internal stability. Internal stability encourages trust. Trust strengthens respect. This sequence develops gradually through repeated interactions. It's never the result of a single conversation. Perhaps the most significant transformation occurs within your own mind. When you repeatedly honor your own priorities, your brain begins building evidence that your decisions matter. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, whether protecting focused work, exercising consistently, spending uninterrupted time with family, or simply allowing yourself adequate rest, you strengthen your sense of personal integrity. Integrity isn't merely a moral concept, it is a neurological experience. Your brain continuously compares intentions with actions. When those two remain aligned over time, self-confidence grows because your nervous system learns that your own commitments can be trusted. That internal trust becomes the foundation for every external relationship. Because before other people learn to respect your time, your attention, and your boundaries, your own brain must first receive consistent evidence that these things deserve protection. And once that evidence accumulates through repeated action rather than repeated intention, the way you move through the world begins to change. Your decisions become clearer, your relationships become healthier, and your presence carries a quiet sense of purpose, not because you demanded respect from others, but because your daily behavior demonstrated that you had already learned to respect yourself. If there's one idea I want you to remember, it's this. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. The people who learn to protect it don't become distant. They become more intentional, more present, and ultimately more respected. Start choosing where your time goes instead of allowing everyone else to choose it for you. Small changes in how you manage your availability can lead to remarkable changes in your mindset, your relationships, and your future. Thank you for watching. If you found this video valuable, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care of your mind, protect your attention, and invest your energy where it truly matters.